Brilliant. And next, we're going to move on to something perhaps more lighthearted. We have Liam, one of our tutors, come on to bring us into the wonderful world of maths and floating point numbers. Hello, Liam.
Hello, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Before you go, can you please confirm to me that when I try and share my screen now that everything is showing up okay?
I'll let you know, yeah.
Cool. Okay, should be sharing the screen now. So any moments, there we go.
Cool, I can see the console log. Yeah, perfect. Take it away.
That's exactly what we want. Okay. Hello, everyone. So in the spirit of, well, unintentionally, the fact that Elijah just spent a while chatting about considering the things that computers can do and potentially some of the scariness around that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that perhaps computers can't do. So any fellow JavaScript developers will recognize this little line of code that I've got here, probably. But for anyone who doesn't know, the purpose of this line of code is to take the sum that we have in question, so that's that 0.1 plus 0.2 thing right there, and is to work out the result of that and then show it back to the user. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just going to do that sum and then give us the answer, which of course we all know is 0.3. But when we plug it into JavaScript, which is one of the programming languages that we use here at North Coders, we get this nasty looking thing. 0.3 with an awful lot of zeros after it, followed by a mysterious rogue 4 at the end. JavaScript has not behaved in the way that we would intend it to. And we would think of all the things that computers can do, surely it can do some straightforward arithmetic. We are shocked by the fact JavaScript is not behaving in the manner in which it is supposed to. So what I want to talk about today is why. So why is it happening? Why is a computer doing this when such a simple task that we think computers are so advanced these days, and yet here we are seeing such an obviously incorrect answer? The reasons are twofold. So I'm going to go through both of these points. And the first one, broadly speaking, is that decimals are hard. I'm sure many people harking back to GCSE maths will sympathize with this. Decimals are hard, but more specifically, some decimals are particularly hard for computers. So to see what I mean by that, let's consider some of the decimals that we have in question. 0.1 and 0.2, as far as we can see, are pretty straightforward. 0.1, 0.2, a few digits, a couple of decimal points, job done. And we can kind of make sense of those ideas in our head. Let's move on instead to 1/3. 1/3 feels relatively straightforward as a fraction. You know, we're all familiar with splitting things up between 3 people. And if we do that, if we do try and split things up into thirds, and we consider what that looks like as a decimal, what we end up with is this thing that goes on forever. So 0.33333, we would say, is a recurring decimal because it goes on infinitely. And it will always repeat itself with that mechanism. But I can never write it down on this slide, obviously, because there are infinite digits. And this is an issue, not necessarily for humans, because our human mind can kind of pass the idea of something that goes on forever without having to imagine every single 3 on there. It can be like, yeah, I get the gist of it. It's going to take that 3 and it's going to repeat it, and every next 3 is going to have another 3 after it and another 3 after that, etc., etc. But the problem is that computers don't quite feel the same. Humans might look at it and feel like, yeah, I get that. Computer is going to really struggle with something that goes on forever, because my computer is probably only about 1 square footage of stuff, of hardware, and that hardware is limited in what it can store. My brain can comprehend it, my computer struggles. So if my computer can't comprehend an infinite number of decimal places, what does it do? Because it has to do something. We're probably at some point going to type the value 1/3 into our computer. So we have to think of the question of what does it actually do when we do that? Well, 1 divided by 3, as we know, is going to be 0.33333, and it's going to keep going on forever. But at some point, that has to stop. So let's say, for argument's sake, that what the computer does is it decides that 4 3s are good enough for its purposes. At some point, it has to stop. The stopping point is arbitrary. In our example, we're going to say it's after 4 decimal points. So everything after those 4 is ignored. We lose it completely. And we have to settle on this compromise, or the computer settles on this compromise, rather, of 1/3 just being 0.3333. Done. Which is okay. It's actually not that far off being right. But problems quickly arise when we try and think about adding these sorts of numbers together. So if we take 1/3 of something and 1/3 and another third, and we add those together, a human might say, okay, if you have 3/3 of something, that's a whole, right? That's just 1. But when I'm looking at it in computers terms, I get 0.3333 plus 0.3333 plus 0.3333. And you may have to take my word on this. As I said earlier, decimals are hard, but if I do try and add those 3 numbers together, and feel free to verify this in your own phone calculators, what I get is 0.9999, which is most definitely not 1. Which is a problem, right? Because we know for a fact that if you take 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3, the answer is 1. But here, we have not got that. We've ended up with something which is just slightly wrong. So when I say decimals are hard, this is what I mean. Which leads us on to the second point, because we haven't really addressed the fact that I introduced this mysterious, tricky number of 1/3, but I said that 0.1 and 0.2 were fine, right? We could deal with them. There wasn't really any trouble in kind of displaying them. I wouldn't need an infinite number of pieces of paper to write them out. But the problem is, computers only understand binary. So binary is just 0s and 1s. Okay? Humans use a base 10 number system. Base 10, because we have 10 fingers, is where it comes from, and we have 10 digits. Okay, so 0 to 9 is our 10 digits, and we can use the numbers 0 to 9 in writing out all the different kind of numbers that we want. But computers, what they work in is base 2, which is binary, where the only numbers they have at their disposal are 0s and 1s. So when I go into my software and I type in the number 0.2, and then when that software is run by the computer, what it has to do is it has to convert that number into 0s and 1s, into binary. And what I end up with is this thing. When I try to convert 0.2 to binary, suddenly this simple number 0.2 becomes another recurring decimal. You get 0.00 and then 1100, 1100, 1100, again and again and again, all the way up to infinity. So as we established, because a computer does not have an infinite amount of memory, what it has to do is it has to find a point at which it stops. And in this particular case, in this programming language I'm discussing, we end up with this nasty looking thing. So it goes on for a while, admittedly, but it does stop. It reaches a point where eventually it's like, okay, this is as good as we're going to get. Okay, for our purposes, this is as much as I can justify keeping for a single number. This is as close a representation to 0.2 as I can get. But it's not perfect. Because if it were perfect, it would go on forever. It would be that 1100 repeated forever and ever and ever. But as we established, at some point we have to stop. So this then brings us finally back to what happens when we do 0.1 plus 0.2. Well, both of those numbers have to be converted into binary in the background. And that looks like this horrible thing, which I'm obviously not going to read out, but this is what we end up with. And then things that we can't make sense of at all. I obviously had to plug this into a program to actually do this addition, because there's a reason why humans don't read binary. There's a reason why it's a language for computers and not for us. And we get this equally nasty looking thing. Again, feel free to confirm in your own time if you so wish. And yep, that is indeed a bit of a nightmare, because this is not something that we humans want to bother with. But this here, this final binary number at the very bottom of my screen, when the computer comes back to us and it says, okay, it knows that a human has input the sum 0.1 plus 0.2. It wants to give the human an answer that the human can read. So it converts it back into those decimal numbers that we know and love, with 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, etc. And it converts it back to not exactly 0.3, but instead 0.3 with something like 15 zeros, followed by a 4. Seems simple, but nothing is ever simple. And I was kind of preparing this talk, and I was kind of thinking about, this is interesting to me, but like, what's the kind of point to this? I suppose, like, what am I trying to say with this talk? If anything other than I will take any excuse to talk about maths that I can get, and I guess it's made even more appropriate with the fact that Elijah just did the talk about what he did. Because I think the point here is that computers can do so many incredible, amazing things, and technology has progressed extremely far. And it is absolutely right that we keep check of how technology is progressing and keep, trying to keep on top of these things so that they don't get on top of us. But it's important to remember that human inputs cannot be undervalued, even now when technology has progressed to the point that it can. Computers can do amazing things, but our human brains have incredible capacity to understand the limitations of those computers and to be able to fill in the gaps. And I personally, and this is a complete opinion, think that it's going to be a long time before that changes. There's going to be computers are ultimately limited by what we put in them. And I think that the human quality that we provide in interfacing with that technology is going to be valuable for a long, long, long time. Anyway, that is my talk on floating point numbers, which is the fancy term for if you have to write decimals in a computer. If anyone wants to look into it more, they are called floating point numbers, for reasons that are not interesting enough to explain. Yeah, thank you, everybody.